This is What If Subaru Had Nen. Okay, it's I Like Anime What If, and let's get right into this. So this is what's gonna happen. Subaru is in his current world and he has just been born. He's been born into an influential hunter family. Which, yes, his actual world is HunterXHunter world. And it's also not at the same time. So, yeah, Subaru, who has just been born, is held up to, well, the mom that has just, birthed Subaru. The doctor just hands it to the mother. And the mother looks at the boy and ends up noticing something. That she senses a slight aura coming from him. And she is very ecstatic because she thinks that maybe her son is one of those lucky few that are born with Nen. And the father, who's in the corner just leaning on the door, is smiling at this and thinks, man, I can train this kid into a very good assassin. And he just starts to smile, thinking of how to train the boy later on in life, and how he can be the pride of the family, unlike his other siblings who are failures, except for one. So he starts walking up to the baby, and the mother just is cradling it in her arms, and the father just yanks it out of her arms and says, I'll be taking this. And the mother is screaming and saying, no, 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 don't turn him into a monster like you turned the other ones into. And, well, all the dad does is slap the shit out of her. She falls to the ground, and she hits the table on the side, the actual desk beside her bedroom, which she was delivered in a bedroom, not a hospital. It was by a personal doctor. And she is unconscious now, and the father just walks out with the baby. Time skip. 4 years has gone by. Subaru is talking to his siblings, Zach, George, Miley, and Millie. And, well, he hasn't gotten along with any of them. They're all cold-hearted. They see him as a threat to their household standing. Because Subaru's father, which is Vince, well, he dotes on Subaru with more training, more violence, more beatdowns. And, yeah, Subaru does not like this. Because it's not actual love or care or affection that he's read in books. And while his siblings, they just can do whatever they want. Because Vince isn't really interested in them. Because he sees no potential in any of them. Only sees potential in Subaru. Because he felt the potential since he was born that he had potential in him. But he's getting more frustrated because the potential won't come out. And he has been beaten since he was 3. Viciously. And the fact he's not dead is a surprise and amazement to the rest of his family. Even to the butlers in the household. Because Vince would beat on him for hours until he has ruptured some of his organs, until he's puking out blood, till his eyes are completely puffed out from all the tears he's been crying, from when his bones feel like they're breaking. Sometimes I could even hear the squash of his guts, of his organs. But he just, the next day after training, appears perfectly fine. And this always amazed them. And they don't really see Subaru as much of a person. They see him as a creature, more of a monster of sorts. Even though he hasn't displayed any monster tendencies, his strength isn't impressive. His regeneration is, though. And Vince just keeps on putting it harder on Subaru for the years. Until Subaru turns 5. And Vince says, why aren't you using your Nen? You were born with it. And he tries to actually teach him. which she tries to teach him 10, and Subaru masters it, but he masters it only in 5 minutes. And, well, Vince looks at him and just punches him in the gut and says that's not quick enough, and makes Subaru puke out blood. And this is in the actual training grounds and the family halls. It's like a desert area. The training ground is made after a desert. And sometimes whenever Vince thought Subaru needed punishing for not being good enough, for some reason, he'd leave Subaru in the desert training area without water or food for at least 2 to 3 days, which would usually kill Subaru, but his regeneration counteracts this. And it's not his nen ability, it's just his regeneration was oddly high when he was born. It was a mutation. And Subaru just, every time that he was being taught the basics, would get punched or beaten because he's not fast enough. And he ended up getting the advance down very quickly, which Vince was impressed, but still kept on beating on him. Because he was more like a stress ball of sorts, or a punching bag for Vince at this moment. Vince was always stressing out over assassination missions. His entire family is full of assassins. Subaru never knew this, though. And when Subaru is the age of 7, he is told by Vince to follow him, and he follows him without word. He does whatever Vince says without word. His eyes are just always expressionless now, and he just loses himself slowly throughout the years. Vince drags him all the way down to the basement, and he walks down the very dark steps downwards, descending into more darkness with his father in hand. And his father lights up all the torches with his nen, which is flames of purgatory, his nen. He can incinerate anything with the flames that he touches, but he has to touch them. And he didn't tell Subaru about the types of nen, because they haven't gotten to that point yet. And, well, Subaru is in for a huge awakening when Vince says, "Follow me," and he sees all these cells with corpses, all these tortured people with arms and limbs missing, or being removed by these guys with black hoods on their head, with armored plates on their chest. And Subaru is terrified. He's never seen anything like this. And Vince just looks at his terror and smiles and says, "That won't last for long after I'm through with you." And he just moves Subaru into a cell, throws him in, chains him up, and pulls out actual electric whips. And he starts whipping Subaru, whipping off lashes into his chest, leaving cuts all over his body from how hard he's slashing at him, leaving bruises everywhere. And he's beating on Subaru while Subaru is just screaming out in pain, asking for it to stop. And Subaru's only 7, so he blacks out very quickly after an hour of this. He blacks out. But no, Vince does not stop. Vince continues doing it each and every day for 2 years. When Subaru is 9, he is finally let out of the dungeon. And Subaru has bulked up because he's starting to adapt to the actual beatings, and his body is trying to compensate for his lack of strength previously, and has started to build muscle mass more, because Subaru started training while he was down there. Whenever he'd be on the actual chains, he tries to pull himself upwards. His legs are the only thing that's not chained whenever Vince leaves. He's been doing pull-ups, pulling his body upwards, and then he's been doing push-ups against the wall while his hands are still chained. He's also been doing sit-ups on the wall, literally defying gravity somehow, which was very odd to Vince. Vince tried to interrogate him how he was doing this, but he didn't tell him, which made him get beaten up for an entire month without break, and also he'd be given very little food, only enough to sustain himself. And Vince, when he came down to drag him out, he said, "Good, you've adapted to the pain. You might need that as a future assassin." And Subaru does not want to be an assassin. Subaru already found out the trade in these months, because he could hear the screams and terror of the victims that were in the cells next to him or across from him. And he could hear the words, "I'll kill everyone in this family. I'll kill everyone in the Natskis." Which, the Natskis is what Subaru's family still is, but they're assassins, as you can tell, and very brutal. Subaru is being dragged up by his father up the stairs, and Subaru is thinking about how to escape from his family. He doesn't want to live a life like this. He's only 9, but he's pretty buff and muscular. He's like the buffest 9-year-old you're ever going to see in your life. And he's actually relatively tall. Not too tall, but tall for a 9-year-old. He's about 5 foot already, which is pretty good. And just so you know, Vince, who's dragging Subaru currently, notices that Subaru's lost in thought and just slaps him in the face as hard as he can until Subaru coughs out a tooth, just spits it out. And he says, "Did you really have to do that? After all the hell you put me through?" And he said this without thinking about the consequences, because every time that Subaru talked back to his dad, it would get much worse. And as soon as he said those words, he put his hands towards his mouth and tried to stop the words coming out of his mouth, but it was too late. His dad drags him back up the stairs, opens the door, and throws him. And he lands right into a wall. The actual basement was literally, and when you go upwards, you just see the kitchen. He was thrown into a wall, and the chefs that were cooking food saw this, and they saw Subaru implanted into the wall, and Vince just grabbed Subaru and said, "So those beatings weren't enough for you to be my obedient tool. For you to carry on the legacy of an assassin. Do you still not want to be an assassin? You will learn, boy." And he grabs his head, removes him from the wall, and just starts throwing him across the room like a rag doll. And every chef, every person in the kitchen, every, a chef's assistant left because they did not want to see this massacre of this boy. Vince would brutally punch him through walls and drag him against the floor. He would then go up to the steps, to the upstairs, and put his face towards the step and make his mouth, literally, his mouth would be biting into the step. And then Vince would just step on his head and make all of his teeth just shatter. And he would say, "This will teach you, boy." And he picks up Subaru by the head, starts choking him, and says, "You know what? I don't think you need that insolent voice of yours. How about if I crush your windpipe?" And he starts crushing him. And Subaru is just in fury, is just screaming in his head, "Why me? Why me? Why me? Why me?" And all of a sudden, he just says, "I want the power to do everything I desire. I want to actually feel the things I want. I want it all. I want the pain, the suffering, and all of this to stop. And I want happiness, love, all of this. I want to have all the sins that everyone else can have. All the sins that I've been seeing that everyone else indulges themselves in. The wrath that they're able to express. Their lust they're able to show. Their greed of wanting anything. Every time I wanted something, it was taken from me. And their envy, the ability to envy others, and not be beaten like a rag doll for it." And he's just screaming while being choked. And he's thinking all these thoughts. And he ends up forming something right beside him. And Vince sees this. And he's smiling, saying, "You finally unlocked your Hatsu." And he just throws Subaru to the side of the wall, and Subaru just goes unconscious, and the Hatsu just disappears. Because Vince is happy that Subaru unlocked his actual Hatsu, so he isn't gonna crush his windpipe, make it to where he can't speak anymore. And for his teeth, they'll regenerate after a month or so, because they've already extracted teeth from him before. His regeneration speed is very fast. And once Subaru was knocked out, he got the nurses that were always on standby for Subaru once Vince was through with him, and Vince was releasing anger on Subaru, to nurse him. And they dragged him into a master bedroom and put him on a soft bed. And Vince is currently still in panic, though, because he didn't know what that ability would do. He didn't know if it would actually kill him or something. He doesn't know what Subaru's Hatsu is. So he's kind of cautious around Subaru now. But he's also happy because his tool has gotten stronger. And when Subaru wakes up, because he's in a month-long coma from that, when he wakes up and he thinks about what happened, he's angry because he's got knocked out into a fucking coma for a month after he looks at this calendar. And the nurses beside him see his contorted face in anger, and they see that he's furious, and they very much feel bad for him. All the actual maids and all the servants feel bad for him, but they don't want to be the next ones to get that beat down. So they don't really do anything for him. Except for one, which has looked after him for years and years on end, which Subaru referred to as Nuna. When he heard a soft knock at the door, he knew it was Nuna. So Nuna just walked on in, because Subaru said, "You can come on in." And she ran up to Subaru and hugged him. And Nuna was the only one that showed affection throughout the years. Because whenever he would be beaten, tortured, or any of that, she would actually appear to him and secretly heal his wounds or help him. Because she had a healing Nen, which regenerated stuff. And it could also increase someone's actual regeneration rate. The reason why he actually had an astounding regeneration rate ever since birth was because of her. Because she kept on healing him. And Subaru was always grateful and never ratted her out. Once he was hugged by her, he started to feel a little bit less, angry, started to let that fade, and he hugged her back. All the way until Vince busted down the door and saw Nuna hugging him, and said, "This child does not need such things as affection. That is just a weakness." And he grabs Nuna by the hair and just walks out with her, and Subaru was in fucking rage. He was in a month's coma, had no love, no affection. He could hear everything that was happening and being said about him. And they were all bad things, like he shouldn't have been born if he was just going to be beaten into this world. I feel bad for him. Maybe he should have just died at childbirth, like his mother did. Because his mom shortly died after giving birth to Subaru. But it wasn't because of childbirth. After the one person said this, another person said, "No, she didn't die from childbirth. The master killed her, because she was asking to see Subaru to show some affection." And Subaru was just angry at Vince, because every time he had something, every time he had someone who cared about him, was just going to be ripped away from him. Was everything going to be ripped away? And he was in such anger that he didn't even notice that there was a slot machine right beside him. And Vince sensed killing intent, and a huge burst of Nen come out of Subaru. He looked behind him, and all of a sudden, Subaru was already in front of him, and punched him in the face so hard he went through 5 walls in the mansion. And he landed all the way to the outside to the garden. And Subaru was enraged. He looked at the slot machine, and he was so angry he just fucking punched the shit. Because he didn't know what it was. He thought it would be a servant trying to hold him back with a Nen ability that he didn't have one yet, he thought. And he punched it. And then it started spinning, because he punched the actual side of it, making it activated. It started spinning, and it said, Wrath activated. And Subaru felt a surge of anger rush through him. He felt so much power, though, accelerating from him. And then he released so much nen that the whole mansion threatened to shake and burst or crumble between his weight, and he's only 9 years old. But Subaru also started coughing out blood, and his eyes were bloodshot red. His hair started dyeing completely pitch black. His hair was already black, but it was not pitch black. It was completely pitch black. His eyes were completely red like an oni, a demon. And he rushed out of the house, lunging towards his dad, who was just gotten up out of the front of the garden. And Subaru punched him ferociously in the chest, flying him 5 meters from the house. Subaru kept on rushing towards him. And they're in the forest now, because their house is where a forest would be. They're in a forest. That's where their house was built, their mansion. And Subaru rushed towards Vince at such high speeds, but Vince used his flames. He touched the ground, and the ground burst in flames in front of Subaru. Subaru dodged to the side at a very fast speed that Vince could not keep up with. Vince was kind of terrified. No, he was terrified at its very core. And Subaru all of a sudden appeared behind Vince and used Gyo into his hands and his right hand hook and punched with such power, such speed, that there was a shockwave that was sent through Vince's entire body. It felt as if all the bones were threatening to snap or crumble at that punch. And Vince was flown very far. You could see a giant crater where he was pushed all the way 5 meters into a mountain. And the mountain, let me just tell you, that crater pushed him into the mountain so deep that he had to run for about 5 whole minutes just to get out of it. And he's at top speed, and he's a top hunter. Not really a top hunter, but he's a strong hunter. And he's running out of it. And Subaru doesn't want to wait for 5 fucking minutes. So he rushes in too. But this is what Vince was hoping. Because once Subaru rushes in to the entrance of the cave that he just made from punching Vince in there, all that Vince does is touch the side of the rocky walls, and flames combust around Subaru, who has just entered, and then it explodes. And Subaru is sent flying out of the cave he made, and Vince is already above Subaru and says, Flames of Purgatory, Chapter 1. The Chains of Hell. And chains appear from the ground below Subaru, threatening to pierce his back, which they do. They shoot out from the ground behind Subaru while he's in midair, and they come straight through Subaru's chest, piercing through him. And Vince says, I was usually going to keep you as a weapon, but you're too dangerous. And he puts both of his hands up, clasp them together, and just slams down on Subaru, forcing his body to go downwards towards the chains. And then he says, Chapter 3, Gates of Hell. And then, where the chains were in the ground, a gate appears above the chains, and it opens up, and there's this Cerberus that pops out and tries to bite into Subaru. But Subaru was in such rage, thinking about how many things this man has taken from him in his life. And he says, I'll take it all back. I'll rip you to shreds. And he's getting angrier, getting stronger. And there's some heat emanating from Subaru. Subaru is combusting in fire. Fire's all around him. It's completely pitch black. And his completely crimson eyes are starting to turn darker and darker. There are some black strands coming into his eyes. And there's not just flames, dark flames, but shadows going all out of Subaru. Subaru is just enraged. He screams with all of his might, causing the gates behind him to crumble just a scream. And the Cerberus jumps out and tries to bite Subaru, but Subaru merely just tilts his head to the side, rips off all the chains out of his chest with his right hand, and punches the Cerberus with his left, making it fly backwards. And Subaru isn't done yet. He lands on the ground perfectly and just gets in a running stance and runs towards the Cerberus. Runs towards its heads, yanks one of them, gets on the back of it and starts riding it, ripping its heads off, slowly and slower and slower, slowly ripping the neck to where you can see the tear in the skin. You can see the bone, but he's doing it slowly so that the Cerberus can feel the agony he's felt in his life. And he just tears it off. And he goes to the other heads, and he doesn't tear them off, but he says, "You obey me. Kill your master, or I'll kill you." And he's saying this in a very, very deep, horrifying voice that just emanates with power and rage. And the Cerberuses, even though they were made by Nen, could feel this. And they're being overridden by fear. And they're charging towards Vince. And Vince says, "I made you. Why would you attack me for that brat?" And before he could say anything, Subaru was right behind Vince. And Vince lost track of Subaru because he was focusing on the Cerberus that was charging towards him. So when he dodged out of the way to the left, and Subaru was behind him, he had wide eyes and flashbacks were coming through his eyes. And he looked behind him and said, "You bastard, you don't have the ball." And before he could even finish, Subaru plunged his fist right through Vince's chest and ripped out his heart, picked up his corpse, lifted it above himself, and ripped it in half with his bare hands, and screamed to the world, "I will not be beaten." And he let out all the rage he's felt for all these years. And he's just livid right now. And he notices that butlers are coming out of the mansion, and he knows he can't go anywhere anymore. So he runs away into the mansion very quickly, running past all the butlers and stuff, which they see the corpse. They're on high alert. They end up pressing a red button that they have installed in their clothing to alarm if a master has been killed, so that the Grandmasters in the Natsuki family can eliminate the threat. And the threat is Subaru. So they all disperse into the actual front of the house, the mansion. Subaru sneaks behind them using Zetsu, which was a very risky move. But it paid off, because the main Grandmaster wasn't there. It was just the Grandmaster who was drunk on his ass. And if it was the one that Subaru knew from all those years back, Subaru wouldn't stand a chance. And Subaru just jumped through the window, went into where Nuna was, grabbed Nuna off the bed, and, gently rubbed her face, and Nuna woke up and said, "Subaru, what happened? I don't remember anything." And Subaru says, "You were knocked out. I dealt with my dad. Do you want to come with me? Or do you want to stay here? I really hope that you come with me, but I understand if you don't want to." And Nuna, who looks at him with tender eyes and says, I'll go with you, Subaru. I mean, I'll always be there for you." And Subaru just smiles at this and thinks, "At least I have one person on my side." And she just hugs him, and Subaru carries her bridal style out of the mansion and sneaks away. And we'll time skip again. It's already been a few years. He's already 15 now. And Nuna and Subaru have gotten closer and closer. And Subaru is thankful for Nuna. But he still calls her Nuna, even though her name is Sarah. But it's just a habit for Subaru. They live in a slum area. They're not really rich, but they're not really too poor. They're a middle class house in a slum area. And Subaru's fine with that. And when he wakes up one day, he just thinks, well, today's a new day. Might as well go ahead and get started. And that's where I'm going to end What If Subaru Had Nen. I put a lot of thought into this one, and I hope you guys enjoy this, because I was thinking a lot about this. Sorry it took me so long to upload it, but I'm usually a Nighthawk, I'm going to be honest. Also, please watch my second channel, my gaming channel, please, and just tell me how you think about it. Anyway, goodbye, I Wacky Anime What If, am now going to be gone, and hope you have